Alright, what's up, Dragon Brood? Y'all seem to like these different preview videos, so I decided to do a fun list for this one. We're going to talk about the jankiest cards from the set that are the most fun to build around. This is kind of a thing that I think always starts conversation, and people always have big ideas, so let's talk about what those 10 cards are from Phyrexia All Will Be One that could be hella fun to build with. Alright, let's start with All Will Be One. It's a 5 mana, so 3 red enchantment. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. So you can't hit any of your own stuff, so that's what that means. But the fact is, anytime you put a counter on a permanent or player, like this means it counts for anything that goes on a card effectively. Now, this could be on a planeswalker that you just get to activate because this could go into an aggro deck, like let's say maybe a Gruul modified deck that cares about +1/+1 counters, right? Perfect. It can go into something like the poison decks, though I don't think poison really wants this type of card. I think you're better off just proliferating, so don't think you want to do that. But anything that also just has cards that say pay whatever, put a +1/+1 counter on something, or even a -1/-1 counter on something if you're playing older formats. Right? This card has a lot of things you can do with it, and 5 mana is not that hard to achieve. As a matter of fact, we even have a card in the set that's a common that puts oil counters on itself to produce mana. Right? So you can actually tap the new creature, put mana on itself, or mana into the pool, use that to cast this, and then every turn after that, just start going off, right? So you can actually have this in play, possibly on turn 3, without a whole lot of extra work, and then go ham. So we'll see what happens with this. But this is actually a really cool card. I think it allows you to do a lot of stuff, and that extra damage just continually is a thing every single turn. And this could be combined with something like Mechanized Warfare, potentially, because this is a red card dealing damage. So there's like all kinds of stuff happening here that I think you could really have some fun with. Alright, next up we have Geth, Thane of Contracts. It's a colorless black, so 3 mana for a 3/4 Phyrexian zombie. Other creatures you control get -1/-1, but you can pay 3 mana, the same colorless black that you paid to cast it, tap it, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead, activate only as a sorcery. Now, this reads very weird, right? Because you look and say, well, why do I want to give all my other stuff -1/-1? Honestly, a lot of times you don't. However, there are a lot of creatures that don't care because they have 2, 3, 4 toughness, and that's fine. But being able to shove stuff in your graveyard and get it back out for just 3 mana is actually pretty nice. There's also some weird scenarios where you don't necessarily have to play a lot of other creatures in play. You could potentially just have this be the one, play some planeswalkers, everything else goes into your graveyard. Right? There's a few things you could do with this. There's also the real possibility that you don't even play this early. So you play your normal game for a couple turns, then this comes down on turns 4, 5, 6, something like that. Then you just start getting stuff out of your graveyard. This is the cheapest reanimator thing that we kind of have available, I'm pretty sure. The cool thing about it, though, is you don't even have to think about it in terms of standard. This could actually be used in something like Commander pretty well, because there are a lot of creatures people play with that aren't going to be affected that much by -1/-1, but actually give you a lot of options out of your graveyard. There's some commanders that already decide they need to fill up their graveyard to use their ability. This just kind of goes along with that, especially if your whole plan is just to keep getting big old things. You don't care if they're, instead of being a 6/6, they're a 5/5 or some such, right? So this card's quirky, generally kind of bad, but I have a feeling that this is the type of card that when it shows up and gets to activate 2 or 3 times, you're not going to enjoy it. Unctus Grand Metatect, a colorless blue for a 2/4 Phyrexian Vidalcan. Other blue creatures you control have whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. You can pay a blue Phyrexian mana until end of turn. Target creature you control becomes a blue artifact in addition to its other types. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, the cool thing about this card is it actually kind of can go 2 different ways, right? If you're playing something where you just want to draw a bunch of cards or discard a bunch of cards or fill up the graveyard, then maybe you want to play this alongside just a whole bunch of blue cards, right? But you can also play it alongside a lot of the cards that came out in the last set, because we have several cards that actually make artifact tokens. Well, those artifacts are going to be 2/2s, and that's a pretty big deal. And then randomly, you can still turn those artifacts into blue creatures, so you can still draw and discard if you want to. This card's actually interesting because it's actually affordable. It's a 2/4 body, and it actually has 2 kind of upsides for the most part for what it does for that same 3 mana. This is going to be a tough one. I don't know what the deck particularly looks like that wants this, but I feel like once we figure it out, it's going to be some significantly sized bodies along with a lot of extra cards. Ichormoon Gauntlet, 2 colors and a blue for an artifact. Planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate or -12, take an extra turn after this one. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. Basically what this says is every time you cast a non-creature spell, you can choose a counter and you can move it up. Now, the thing about this card is that it's going to be very strong when it hits. And it doesn't even have to hit for very long. If it even sits on the board for 1 turn and you have a couple of planeswalkers, that's a lot of extra value you can get out of this. I mean, think about this. It, at the very least, says that your planeswalkers have an automatic +1 ability, even if nothing else is going on. But it's not just the +1. It actually proliferates, so each of your planeswalkers goes up 1. So if you build this with 3 or 4 planeswalkers on the table, and you activate 1 for proliferate, all of them get to go up. And then the other one can proliferate, and then they all get to go up. So you might be activating Planeswalker 3 and 4 for their ultimate from the first 2 going off, right? This is kind of a wild card. And again, this is just for any deck for any non-creature spell. So if you have anything that has counters, yeah, go for it, right? It has to be a counter on a permanent now, so this doesn't count for something like poison, for instance. But yeah, this could actually still be really good. This might even fit into some type of aggressive build that does care about +1/+1, maybe with unblockable creatures or flyers. Like, this could still be a bit of a nuisance for your opponent. And let's not even get on the whole take an extra turn thing. I hate that it exists at all in any game. But yeah, if this goes off and you're getting to take extra turns and you already have the planeswalkers set up, it's going to be pretty hard for your opponent to come back. Drivnod, Carnage, Dominus, 3 colorless, black for an 8/3 Phyrexian horror. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. You can pay 2 Phyrexian black mana, exile 3 creatures from the graveyard, put an indestructible counter on Drivnod. This card, I don't even think you have to try that hard, right? We know the decks this goes into already. Any type of aristocrats things, any type of sacrifice things, any of that stuff, this card's going to be great for that, right? Like if you're sacrificing something and then you get counters or tokens or you get to deal extra damage, this is just going to do all of that twice. So this lets you build up a board, drain your opponent, whatever the case may be, right? There's so many cards that care about things dying or going to the graveyard. This is just too good. And this is a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent. So it doesn't even have to cause a triggered ability of a creature. So if you have any enchantments or artifacts that trigger from creatures dying, that still counts. Like, this card's actually pretty quality, and it's an 8/3. Now, 3 toughness is pretty easy to deal with for the most part. Not a guarantee, but an 8 power is strong. I mean, the only downside of this card is it doesn't really have any type of evasion, but realistically, that's not what you're playing it for anyway. You want that doubled up trigger. And there's a lot of places this card kind of already goes. We have another black card in Archfiend of Dross. 2 colorless, black, 6/6, Phyrexian demon, flying. It enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from it. Then, if there are no oil counters, you lose the game. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. So there's a lot of stuff going on with this card. Let's say, first off, it's a 4 mana 6/6 flyer, which is great. However, it does have the downside that eventually it will die and you'll lose the game. But while it's on the battlefield, you actually get to have your opponent lose life whenever their creatures die. So there's a few different things you could do with this. The first is that you could set up your opponent with small creatures that die a lot. There's a few ways to do that, right? It is also just a big 6/6 that you can just attack with. That's an option, because your opponent's not going to want to get bashed with this thing for 3-4 turns in a row. They're probably going to try to kill it. And if they kill it, you don't lose the game. So yeah, you're in a pretty safe spot as far as that goes. The other thing, though, is we do have some cards that let you effectively donate a permanent to your opponent. And we haven't really had a lot to do with those in Standard. However, now this becomes a real thing that you could actually give your opponent, and it's a limited clock. I mean, admittedly, you have to set it up correctly with having 1 or 2 oil counters left, shove it over, and then hopefully they don't kill it themselves. But even if they do, they spent one of their own cards on it, and you already got your upside from it. So, sure, Why not? I think this is a pretty interesting card. I would actually like to see this played a little bit, and even wouldn't mind losing to it, because, I mean, it'd be pretty sweet if the opponent even tried it. But yeah, this card's actually really interesting, really neat. Big card for low cost, high upside, but also a very, very tough downside. So yeah, this card should be a fun one. Malcator, Purity Overseer, colorless, white-blue, 1/1, Phyrexian Elephant Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact token. At the beginning of your end step, if 3 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, you get to make a 3/3 Phyrexian golem. Now, this card's kind of interesting in and of itself because you're already paying 3 mana to get 4 power and 4 toughness worth of creatures. Granted, it's a 3/3 and a 1/1, but still, for 3 mana, that's actually pretty good, right? Hard to complain about that. But the upside actually isn't that hard to hit. I was thinking about this earlier before I started making the video, and the reality is we have a lot of stuff that's going to be putting artifact mites into play. That makes it a lot easier to hit that artifact target you need, especially if you just like make 1 or 2 and then you put an actual new card onto the battlefield. So this card might be able to do a little bit of something. I mean, because think about the fact if you've already built up your board and then you get another free 3/3 just because, it wouldn't take long for this to beat down the opponent. And then pair this with the Urza that gives artifact creatures +2/+2. And like there's a few different ways you can kind of turn this into a semi-aggro type deck in blue-white, which you don't have that often, which could be kind of cool. Graaz, Unstoppable Juggernaut. Though it's probably pronounced Graaz, but I like Graaz because it sounds bigger and scarier. So we're going to go with Graaz, Unstoppable Juggernaut. But this is an 8 mana 7/5. Juggernaut you control, attack each turn if able. Juggernaut you control can't be blocked by walls, because that's a thing, but it's a Juggernaut thing. It really doesn't matter for standard. And then other creatures you control have base power and toughness 5/3, which is a fun throwback callback to the old Juggernaut, and are Juggernauts in addition to their other types. So what this does, it turns all your creatures into 5/3s, and then they have to attack each turn if able. However, there's some fun things here, really, if you think about it, because we do have the ability to ramp up to this, and you can use all those mana creatures and turn them into 5/3s and just get a big attack in. That's pretty sicko. You could just make a bunch of tokens with mites or whatever else. Or even more fun, you could do something like Awaken the Woods, and then the next turn cast this, and now you have a bunch of 5/3s your opponent has to deal with on the next turn, right? Lots of fun stuff we could do with this card. The card itself, not great. It's a 7/5 for 8, meh, right? But the fact that it turns everything else you have into 5/3s is pretty big. Now, it does have the downside of everything has to attack, but to be fair, you're attacking with a bunch of 5-power creatures, so do you really care that much? Probably not. They're going to help get the job done. So yeah, this is actually really, really cool. I'm a big fan of this card. I don't think it's going to be good, but I do think the times it actually hits is going to be highly entertaining. And I'm kind of curious what the arena thing's going to be like. Are we going to turn everything into actual old Juggernauts when it does the little morph thing? That would be cool. Monument to Perfection. It's a 2 mana artifact. Pay 3, search your library for a basic, sphere, or locust land card. Reveal it, put it into your hand. Or you can pay 3, and then this becomes a 9/9 Phyrexian. Jeez, I don't know why I'm having trouble talking. Phyrexian construct artifact creature. It loses all its other abilities. It gains indestructible and toxic 9, which is huge. And you can only activate this if you have 9 or more other lands that are basic, spheres, or locusts. Now that's a lot, right? That's a lot this card's trying to do and a lot to set up. However, as we had the set previewed, we saw more and more lands that are count as spheres, and that makes it very easy to use this. And there's spheres that make different colors. There's spheres that have a bunch of different abilities. There's spheres, I think, that draw cards, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with them. And that means you could probably build some type of mid-rangey or control deck around those, or utilizing those, and playing this. I mean, at the very least, if you build a control version, you're at least getting to search for a land every time you have mana open, right? So let's say you don't have to counter or kill a thing your opponent plays. You pay 3, tap this, go find another land. So you're going to hit the 9 lands one way or another. And you don't even necessarily have to play only spheres and basics or whatever, right? Like you could actually just make that 80% of your land and still play the other stuff because this is going to search out what you need. Now, do I think this card's particularly great? I don't know. I mean, turning something into a big like 9/9 that has all those abilities is kind of cool. And this doesn't say you have to activate as a sorcery. So you could potentially just leave it on defense so your opponent can't ever attack you with anything significant either. So for 3 mana, you just turn this into a big 9/9. So I'm kind of into this card in a weird way. I don't know how great it is, but being able to search lands every turn and or turn it into a giant monster when you're ready seems like it could be worth it. Capricious Hellraiser, 3 colorless, red for a 4/4 Phyrexia dragon. This spell costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It has flying, and whenever this enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard, choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and you copy it. You can cast copy without paying its cost. So this is a pretty interesting card, right? Because the 7 mana 4/4 flyer, even with an upside, is not spectacular. However, if you can play this for 3 and get a 4/4 flyer and get to cast another spell that's in the graveyard, now it becomes really neat. And I do like the fact that it shows you 3 cards at random, but you get to choose which one of them. So it's not like you just get one of them at completely random. I like that because rarely are you going to have 3 things in your graveyard that you don't want any of them. You know what I mean? And getting to play it for free, kind of good. And we know there are ways to make this work because people have practice from playing Phoenix over, well, a previous standard season, but a lot in the older formats. So all you have to do is find ways to mill yourself, draw cards, discard a card. There's a lot of ways to do that. Or even just killing stuff your opponent has and then eventually just playing a 4/4 and getting to kill another thing because you have a bunch of kill spells in the graveyard. Like, this is the type of card that I immediately kind of turn my nose up at and go, nobody's going to play this. But then the more you think about it, going, that's possible. There's a way people could play this, right? Now, do I think it's going to dominate the format in any way? I don't think so, but I think this can be a nice piece to something that's already playing a whole lot of spells or just shoving stuff into their graveyard. All right, that's it. That's my list. I want to know what it is that y'all are going to play and what you're looking for, or did I leave something off the list that's even more janky and crazy to build a deck around that you're going to be playing? I'm curious what's on your list. And honestly, if you want to know what I actually thought was overrated, check out this other video.